Hi, today I want to talk about inks. I'm going to look at water-based inks, safe wash oil-based inks and traditional oil-based inks. Now there are loads of inks on the market and I'm only going to talk about the ones that I know. So this won't be comprehensive by any means, but it will give you an idea. So water-based inks, and by that I mean that the ink formulation is water-based and they clean with a damp cloth dipped in water. There are various ones available. The ones that I teach with are by Lucas, and they used to go by the name Nerschau, but they're Lucas now. And I find those a good all-rounder ink. They come in these big bottles, and they've changed the lid, and I don't particularly like it anymore. It's got a sort of little cap on the top, which is okay if you're on your own in the studio, but I use these for teaching. And so in order to make it easier for my students, I put them into bottles like this. This is a cosmetic bottle that I got on eBay. I got a whole load of them on eBay. And they're actually, I would do this even if I wasn't teaching, because it turns faffing about with the awkward bottle into an easy little bottle with a much more effective lid to it. So let me just show you what those inks are like. So here's one that I have mixed up. The Lucas inks come in fairly basic colours, so I like to mix up different colours for teaching. So my students have got a wide range of colours, so let's just squeeze a little bit of that out. Sort of nice orangey red there. And the other sort of ink that I've used is Schminky. And Schminky's water-based inks are, again, they're pretty soft. And then finally, the other ink that I've got here, and it's a metallic, is by Speedball. And I like their metallics. This one's separated out a bit. In fairness to Speedball, I haven't used this in a long time, so I don't think that's their fault. I think that's my fault for leaving it for a long time. Now, all water-based inks are what I would call quite soft. If you are used to oil-based ink like me, then these seem very, very soft. You'll see when we look at oil-based ones how much more stiff they are. They're very soft inks when it comes to spreading them out. And with the soft inks like this, it's really important that the rollers you use for them are soft rollers, because the softer the ink, the softer the roller, the better the result you'll get. If you have a very hard roller and very soft ink like the water-based inks, then it's very hard to pick up a nice cohesive thin layer of ink on your roller, on your hard roller. So with these ones I definitely recommend a soft roller. There are additives for these inks. You can get extender. Lucas inks don't make an extender. Schminky I think do, and I've also found this in my cupboard of tricks, which is a Schminky product, and that's a gloss that you can mix with the ink to make it glossier so that the finish is shiny. And I think Speedball do an extender, a transparent extender to make the ink more transparent, and we'll look at extender when we come to the printing. So this would be mixed in with your ink, and then when it was printed it would have a glossier finish to it. Now these inks are compatible for mixing, should you wish to make a sort of reddish brown. The way to check if inks are compatible is look at the way that you clean up. All of these inks here, reddish brown with some gold in it, all of these inks here clean in the same way with a damp cloth and water, and you can see you can mix them together and use them. The other thing about water-based inks that I find is that the colour you mix on the slab, when you put it on paper, sometimes it's a little darker, a little edgier on the paper when you roll it out. So if I spread that out a bit, if you can see, but there's a slight colour variation. So if you're using water-based inks, I would always have a bit of paper to test your colours on. People like these because they can be cleaned just with water, they don't have any fumes, they dry quite quickly, and that's why I use them in class. The downside for me with water-based ink is that it can be quite hard to use them on larger prints. They can cockle the paper if you're doing large areas of water-based ink, and also if you, like me, do like painting with little rollers and things like that, these can start to actually dry on the paper and get tacky while you're doing that, and you can end up ripping the paper when you come to print on your lino. So the fast drying can actually be a problem for me in my kind of printing. So although lots of people like them and they're very convenient for me for teaching, I would not opt to use these over oil-based inks. I think these are harder to use than oil-based inks. So we'll look at oil-based inks next and the ones that I use. The next two sorts of ink that I want to talk about are both oil-based, and they are the inks that I use in my work. There's two sorts. There is traditional oil-based ink, which is, as it suggests, it's an oil-based, and when you come to clean it, it requires cleaning with white spirit or mineral spirit to get rid of it. The other sort is also oil-based, but it's safe wash. This brand is called Caligo, and it washes off with water or soap and water. In my experience, as long as you use a bit of elbow grease, you can clean this with just neat water. These two oil-based inks are compatible. You can mix them together if you want to. So I just want to show you, they have slightly different textures. So this one is the water washable oil-based ink. This is the safe wash ink, the yellow, and then this one is the oil-based, the traditional oil-based ink. Now, in a weak moment, I bought this tube of violet ink, which I almost never use, but it will do very nicely to show you textures. I feel that this violet, I'll probably be leaving that to somebody in my will. I'm sure I won't have finished it by the time I'm dead and gone. So if you look at the texture of this, hopefully you can see it's a stiffer texture than those water-based inks we looked at just now, but it's still quite a nice soft texture. This traditional oil-based is a stiffer texture. I'm having to push the palette knife harder through that and to move it around. So that is stiffer. And it's also affected by temperature. On a colder day, I mean, we're recording this in a sort of fairly temperate June day. On a colder day, the oil-based ink is even stiffer, so it can be quite hard to mix on a cold day. So both of these, being oil-based, take time to dry. And one of the things I'm asked about a lot is how you cope with such a long drying time. There are a couple of answers to that. The first is that I use very, very thin layers of ink. It's easier to work with oil-based with thin layers, which is another reason why I don't use water-based inks. So these oil-based inks you can roll out into incredibly thin layers, and the thinner your layer, of course, the quicker it takes to dry, so that helps. Happens to be the way I like to print, so it suits me. The other thing is that when your prints are hanging up to dry, make sure there is movement in the air in the room where they're drying. If you can, have a window open or have a fan or something that moves the air around, because that's what will dry the print. If they are in a room where there's no movement in the air, the surface of the print won't dry, it just sort of like stays wet. So having a little bit of a fan or something to get the air moving makes a big difference. Then there are additives, dryers, that you can add to the ink to speed things along. And they come in various forms. So the first dryer I'm going to talk about is cobalt dryer. I'm sorry it's not in its little proper bottle. I've changed it to put it in a bottle with a dripper. So cobalt dryer comes in liquid form, and if I were going to make this ink dry with cobalt dryer, you'd need a scant drop. That is more than enough for that amount of yellow ink. It won't change the colour of the ink, and you'd mix it in. Probably that's a little too much, if anything, and that will speed up the drying time of this ink from days to hours. It's really very effective. The price you pay with cobalt is that it will make the ink shiny. It dries from the surface down, and the surface can get quite shiny when you're using it. The other sort of dryer is manganese dryer, and here it is in liquid form, and you would add the same, you're aiming at sort of like, 3%, 3-4%. So you could use a manganese dryer. A manganese dryer dries out the inks, and it doesn't cause as much shininess. So it will also speed up drying, but it doesn't cause the shininess. And you'd add it with a dropper, same sort of quantity as I've just shown you with the other dryer. The final product, which is what I use now and what I really recommend, is Printmaker's wax dryer. This is made by Cranfield, and this is manganese dryer, but it's suspended in a sort of, I don't think it's wax, but in a greasy compound, and it's very effective. I would, for this violet, if I was drying out this violet, I would use just a little bit and mix it in, and it would work very effectively to dry that ink, just a tiny bit of it. Having it in a greasy compound like this avoids the problem you get with the other types that are liquid, because the liquid types are in spirit, and so the spirit is sort of fighting the drying action of the manganese or the cobalt, so it's not quite as effective. I just find this much easier to use and a much better product. But any of those three will dry your inks quicker. So that's one additive. The other additive that you can get is called tack reducer or wiping compound, and it looks very like Vaseline. Squeeze a bit out on the block, and this will make your inks more fluid. So if I had, let's grab a bit of that and mix it in, and a bit more. It will make your inks runnier. Now, the temptation is to rely on this wiping compound to make your inks lovely and runny, especially on a cold day when they're very stiff. And yeah, you can see it's actually, I can take all of that, and it's making my ink much softer and runnier. So yeah, as I say, temptation on a cold day is to think, oh, I'll stick a bit of wiping compound tack reducer in with my ink, and then it will be soft and I can mix it up and it's lovely and easy to roll out. The problem is that that'll work nicely as long as you're in a cold studio, and when you roll out your inks and you take your print, at first, while the studio's cold, you'll probably get quite good results. But as the studio warms up, it'll just get runnier and runnier and not as good. So I would be really careful. The only times I would use this is for when I want to do a great big flat sheet of colour where there's no areas of fine cutting that might flood with ink, and I want to get a really cohesive layer of ink. And then I might use this wiping compound a little bit of it to make that ink flow a little more so that I can get that one wide sheet of flat colour. If it's cold day and you're struggling with your ink, rather than adding this, I would get the ink moving, mix it as much as you can with a palette knife, and then roll it out and keep rolling. And the action of the rolling will actually soften the ink and get it behaving in a way that you want so that you can get your inking. So yeah, use that carefully. Otherwise it can just flood everything and make a big mess. So that's sort of general additives for manipulating the ink. The other additive, although I wouldn't call it an additive, I would call it like the main thing, is extender. And extender is a product, think of it like ink with no colour in it, that will make the ink more transparent the more you add to it. And we're going to look at extender. I'm going to show you mixing colours, and we're going to look at extender then. So that is a very quick trot through inks, and I'm going to do a couple of films on mixing colours and using inks next. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope you'll watch the colour mixing videos.